The morning had that strange stillness that comes only when the cold is so deep it steals sound from the world. Even the crows were quiet, perched like black knots on the bare cottonwood branches along the Wyoming flats. A pale strip of sunlight barely crept over the horizon, weak and reluctant as if it, too, wished to stay curled beneath the dark. Frost clung to every fence post and blade of dry grass, glittering like shattered glass across the land. Jack Roden sat hunched on the back step of his log house, shoulders rounded, elbows braced on his knees. His coffee had long since turned cold, but he still held the tin cup simply because it gave his hand something to do. He had the look of a man who'd forgotten what to do with himself, as if the world had moved on but left him behind. His thick wool coat hung open. His boots weren't laced, and his hat sat at an odd angle as though he'd thrown it on without thought. Another night without sleep. Another morning where the sunrise felt like an obligation rather than a gift. The ranch was quiet. Too quiet. Winter did that, buried things, sounds, colors, sometimes memories. But not the memories Jack carried. Not the one of his wife's fading breath, or the tiny grave beside her that had swallowed all of his life's meaning in one violent collapse. He used to be a strong man, a laughing man, a cowboy who rode with purpose and pride. Now he felt hollowed, like someone had scraped out his insides and left nothing but a shell. Wearing a coat, he closed his eyes and let the cold sting his face. It was one of the only sensations that still felt real. Then he heard it. Soft at first, so faint he thought it was the wind sneaking through the cottonwoods. But wind didn't sound like that. Wind didn't cry. Jack straightened. There it was again. A thin, high-pitched wail carried on the breeze. He froze, listening. The cry came once more, trembling and desperate. His tired brain struggled to place it. And then something deep within him, the part of him that still remembered the sound of a newborn, snapped awake. That was a baby, no, more than one. He was on his feet before he even thought to move. Coffee cup forgotten on the step as he bolted across the hard-packed snow. His breath came sharp, freezing in the air as he jogged toward the creek. His boots punched through the icy crust with each step. As he neared the bank, the cries grew louder, sharper, frantic. "Lord above," he whispered, sliding down the incline. He reached the bottom and stared, eyes wide. Heart slamming so hard it echoed in his ears. 3 small bundles floated in the creek, tiny, cloth-wrapped forms bobbing helplessly in the sluggish current. The blankets were soaked and heavy, dragging them lower each second. The thin crust of ice around them was cracked, broken in jagged sheets, as if someone had thrown the infants in with force. His mind couldn't make sense of it. 3 babies, in his creek in winter. Who would? One of the bundles dipped sideways, water slapping against the pale cheek of the child inside. The baby sputtered weakly, a tiny fist trembling above the surface. That image, so small, so fragile, hit Jack harder than any bucking horse ever had. There was no time to think. No time for questions. Only instinct. He jumped. The ice cracked under his boots with a loud crack, then gave way entirely. Jack plunged into the water with a violent splash. The icy shock hit him like a fist, punching the breath from his chest. He gasped, the cold stealing air from his lungs before he even got a proper breath. But he didn't stop. The first bundle drifted toward him. He lunged, grabbing it with half-numb fingers and pulling it tight against his soaked vest. The baby inside whimpered softly, barely alive. "Got you," he muttered through chattering teeth. "I got you." The second was already drifting away, tugged by the current that moved deceptively fast beneath the frozen surface. Jack pushed forward, legs screaming from the cold, arms burning as he fought the pull of the water. His boot struck a hidden rock, nearly toppling him, but he managed to stay upright long, enough to snatch the second infant by the edge of its blanket. His hands felt wooden now, clumsy, but he held on. 2, only one left. The third bundle had drifted farther than the others, sliding dangerously close to a darker stretch of water where the ice thickened and hung just above the surface. If the bundle slipped under that ice shelf, the current would drag it beneath, like a curtain, and he'd never get the baby out. Jack surged forward. The water climbed to his chest, freezing him to the bone. His breath came in sharp bursts, each one a battle. He slammed his shoulder into the ice to break through, but it was thick and stubborn. Pain shot up his arm, but he hit it again, harder, grunting from sheer willpower. On the third strike, the ice cracked. He reached through the jagged opening, stretching his arm deeper than he could see, sweeping blindly. His fingers brushed wet fabric. He missed. Tried again. Nothing. He gritted his chattering teeth, thrust his arm deeper, felt something soft and grabbed hard. His fingers closed around the final bundle. He hauled it upward, pressing all 3 babies against his chest. The cold had taken so much of his strength already that climbing the bank felt impossible. His legs barely responded, trembling violently. His clothes hung like heavy frozen weights. The baby's blankets soaked his shirt even further, chilling him deeper. But he pushed. Step by agonizing step, he fought his way toward the snowy shore. His boots slipped. His knees buckled. He nearly fell back into the creek twice. But he held on. Finally, with a hoarse grunt, he collapsed onto dry ground, curling his body protectively around the infants. His breath came in ragged gasps. His vision blurred. His teeth clattered so hard they hurt. But the babies were crying now. Crying meant breathing. Breathing meant alive. Jack forced his shaking hands to adjust the blankets around them, trying to shield their tiny faces from the wind. His own skin burned from the cold. His fingers were stiffening dangerously fast. But none of that mattered. He looked down at the 3 trembling little souls clinging to life on the snowy bank. And for the first time since he'd buried his wife and daughter, something inside him sparked. Something fierce and bright and painfully alive. "You're safe now," he whispered, though his voice trembled. "I'm right here. I'm not letting go." The creek kept rushing behind him, uncaring and cold. But he had saved them. And in some small, unexpected way, they had saved him too. The fire cracked and stretched high inside the stone hearth, throwing waves of heat across the small ranch house. The sharp smell of burning pine filled the room, pushing back the bitter cold that clung to Jack's skin. Frost still steamed off his soaked shirt as he peeled it away, hands trembling so badly he could barely unbutton it. His fingertips were raw and numb, painful and tingling all at once, early signs of frostbite, but he shoved the thought aside. He had 3 babies to warm. He placed them gently on the braided rug near the stove, one by one, arranging them in a half-circle where the heat was strongest. Their blankets were dripping wet, so he stripped them away and wrapped each tiny body in layers of dry wool. The smallest shivered violently, little chest rising and falling too fast. The largest one whimpered, curling its knees in toward its stomach. The third was alarmingly silent. Jack leaned down, pressing his ear close to the smallest infant's chest. A faint heartbeat tapped against his cheek like a fragile drum. Too weak, too cold. But there. "You just hold on," he murmured, his voice cracking. "You hear me? I didn't pull you out of that creek just to lose you now." He moved quickly, kindling more heat, boiling water, preparing warm milk the way his wife once did for their daughter. Every movement stirred memories he had locked away so tightly he thought nothing could pry them out. But these babies, fragile and gasping, unlocked every hidden corner of his grief. He rubbed each tiny back, coaxing warmth into them. He held the silent one against his bare chest, skin to skin, letting his body heat bleed into the frigid limbs. The small head rested right above the scar on his ribs, a scar he'd taken years ago breaking a bronco that hadn't wanted a rider. "You're safe," he whispered, rocking gently. "I've got you." Gradually, the baby let out a weak cry, thin but real. Jack's eyes stung. He wasn't sure if it was the smoke or something deeper. Once they all showed signs of breathing strong enough, he wrapped them in dry blankets and arranged them near the stove again. The fire's glow softened their faces, turning their pale skin rosy. He checked their fingers, their toes, their tiny lips. No frostbite, miraculously. Whoever abandoned them had done so recently. But why his land? Why a remote creek in the dead of winter? Jack stood slowly, limbs stiff, and finally took a moment to breathe. His shirt clung to him like a frozen shell, so he stripped it off completely and pulled on a dry flannel from the peg by the door. His muscles still shivered uncontrollably. He could feel the cold deep inside. His bones, he'd pushed himself too, far in that water, but he'd do it again without a second thought. He was about to turn back toward the babies when he heard it, a sound behind him. Not the wind, not the fire. A creak. His hand shot out, grabbing the iron poker from beside the hearth. He swung around, heart thundering, and stared at the front door. The latch was rising on its own, metal scraping against wood. Then the door pushed inward with a slow, groaning sigh. A woman stood framed in the doorway, breath fogging in front of her pale lips. She looked frozen from head to toe, hair wild from wind. skirt torn at the hem, boots caked with mud. Her eyes were red-rimmed, swollen from crying or from the cold, likely both. She clasped her arms around her chest as if holding herself together. Jack didn't lower the poker. "Who are you?" he demanded, voice low. The woman didn't answer immediately. Her gaze shot straight past him, to the babies lying by the stove. She gasped, stumbling forward with sudden desperation. "They're alive?" she cried, voice breaking.
Please, please tell me they're alive.
Jack moved to block her path, poker raised. "You hold it right there," he warned. "I found those little ones floating in my creek like someone meant them to drown. You know anything about that?" Her knees buckled. She caught herself on the edge of the table, sobbing. Her whole body shook, not from cold now, but from terror. "I tried," she choked out. "I tried to stop them. I swear to God I tried." Jack's jaw tightened. He didn't trust her, not yet, but he saw truth in her eyes. Something raw. Something broken. "Who did it?" he pressed. "Start talking." She took a shuddering breath, wiping her face with trembling hands. Her voice wavered so badly she had to force each word. "My husband's brothers." Jack blinked. He hadn't expected that. "Why?" She swallowed hard. "Because my husband died last night." Her eyes dropped to the floor, shame pulling her shoulders inward. He was in a gambling house. Owed money he couldn't pay. When he lost everything, his brothers blamed me. Said I pushed him to it. Said I was poison. She squeezed her eyes shut, the memory visibly ripping through her. "When I ran home after hearing the news, the babies, I found them wrapping my children up. All three." Her voice cracked. "They said a widow with 3 newborns would only bring more shame. That the world had enough mouths to feed without mine making more." Her breath hitched. I screamed, I fought. But they pinned me down, forced me to watch as they carried the babies away. She looked up at Jack with wide, shaking eyes. "I broke free and ran after them. I followed the creek. God, I was so sure I was too late." Jack's fingers loosened on the poker. His anger simmered, mixing with something else. Shock, disbelief, a deep rolling fury. "You're telling me those men threw 3 innocent children into freezing water? Their own kin?" She nodded miserably. "They said the snow would bury them before anyone found out." Jack lowered the poker at last. His jaw set like iron. He felt something inside him shift, something primal, protective, rising like a tide. "You said they're your husband's brothers," he said. "Where are they now?" The woman's gaze snapped to the door, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're coming." "They followed me. They won't let you keep the babies alive." Jack's heart thudded. He turned toward the stove, seeing the 3 tiny lives breathing softly in the firelight. Babies he'd pulled back from the edge of death. Infants he'd warmed with his own body. His chest tightened, an ache old and familiar. He looked back at the woman, his expression hardening into something cold and dangerous. "Let them come," he said quietly. He reached for his coat, for his hat, for the rifle hanging on the wall. "Because they're gonna learn real fast." He chambered around with a heavy click. "I don't bury children." And for the first time in years, Jack Roden felt like the man he once was. A man with a purpose. A man with a fight worth standing for. A man with something to protect again,